importance of the media in conflict as well as non-conflict situations is well established. From ensuring access to reliable information to influencing opinions of the people and parties to a conflict, the media's power in shaping international peace and security has been critical in the digital age. Consequently, both the responsibility of journalists engaged in conflict journalism as well as their safety and security while reporting have steadily come under the spotlight. At the outset, Madam Chair, allow me to state that we strongly condemn all physical violence as well as threats of violence against journalists and media professionals in situations of armed conflict. We pay tribute to all journalists who have lost their lives in such situations and call for holding the perpetrators of attacks against journalists accountable. It is the obligation of all states and parties in armed conflicts to comply fully with international law governing the protection of civilians, especially journalists who are not in combat roles. Madam President, in India, our constitution and laws guarantee not only the right to freedom of expression, but also the right to information. We have adhered to and fully supported the Geneva Conventions that establish international legal standards for humanitarian treatment in war. We are committed to the protection of the rights of all our citizens, including journalists, as stipulated in the international instruments to which we are party. While we need to pay the highest attention to protect civilians in conflict and enable journalists to play their role, we also need to ensure that journalists working in situations of armed conflict take appropriate precautions. Journalists need to function within the relevant domestic laws of the countries they're operating in, seek access in a legal manner, and maintain strict neutrality in conduct and not become a party to the conflict. For their part, national governments must put in place robust mechanisms for protecting journalists and their equipment, especially when they have provided information about their whereabouts and coordinates in advance. Also, they must resist imposing arbitrary restrictions unless there is a critical need to do so. In situations of conflict and instability, women are particularly vulnerable. An example closer home is Afghanistan, where restrictions on women in general, but also on women journalists, are a cause for concern. The international community must pay attention to the unfolding situation there. The threat posed by terrorism to free media and to the working of journalists cannot be ignored either. There have been several barbaric examples of killing of journalists by terrorists in our neighborhood. The brutal assassinations and beheadings of journalists are meant to instill fear among the public and scuttle the work of free media. It is a fact that terrorists are using the internet and social media as tools to recruit combatants and obtain financing. It is therefore imperative for us to reaffirm our commitment to a zero-tolerance approach to terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. There can be no exception or justification for any act of terrorism, regardless of motivation and wherever, whenever, and by whoever it is committed. It is equally incumbent on journalists not to play up such terrorist propaganda that in turn may incite violence among innocent civilians. Lastly, member states need to work together and extend cooperation to each other on institution building and capacity building for protection of journalists within their respective jurisdictions. In this regard, we take note of the framework provided by the Security Council Resolutions 1738 and 2222 for the strengthening of the protection of journalists. Madam President, silencing journalists is akin to the silencing of the voice of democracy. The story of India's thriving democracy is one that is written and shaped by India's free and fearless journalists. In this spirit, we reiterate our commitment to the protection of all journalists and stand ready in extending our cooperation to all relevant stakeholders.